Namaste, everyone. I'm going to call this Gen Z Reflection. I'm a part of the Gen Z generation, and the Gen Z generation are individuals who are 4 years old to 24 years old. And we are the next frontier. With the start of 2020 is the beginning of the Gen Z decade. Every decade, there is a generational influence. The last decade, from 2010 to 2020, was the millennial. And the millennial had their generational influence and their culture, right? Every generation has a culture, has an artistry. And we are now at the threshold of experiencing a renovation in our culture, right? Every generation we experience a renovation, right? We're remaking the house, right? And we're taking down walls and we're putting in windows and we're changing the living space, and it's all inspired by the next generation. And the inspiration for this next decade is going to be the Gen Z. And I work with Gen Z, particularly young Gen Zs, children who are in preschool all the way up to even the 5th grade. And I want to share my experience today while I was in an intimate conversation with a first grader. Today, when I was with my students, this young boy, who's first grader, he was one of the last children to leave. And while he was in the bigger group, he was to himself. He's more introverted, more quiet, and just doing his own thing. Right? Doesn't really talk a lot, just seems kind of just by himself. But when all the kids left and there was only maybe about 2 or 3, he became a totally different person. His energy was wide open. And what I discovered is that when we started to just kind of be around each other, because there wasn't really a bunch of other children around, and it just started to calm down, everything started to get more slow because, the day was turning, and he just started to talk. And when he started to talk, he started to really talk, and then really talk, and then it just came like this momentum of him expressing himself. And he wasn't talking about like video games or like TV shows or just about kind of miscellaneous things. He was talking about the earth and what he is observing. He was talking about what is going on this planet, not in a video game or a TV show. He was talking about what he sees going on out in this world. Right, what he's learning. And this particular young boy is very gifted, right? He has this sort of scientific mind. Right? He's kind of like a researcher, or will be in his future. He's like a scientist or a researcher, right? And I always envision him because I like to meditate upon my students, right? I like to, I'm a psychic, so I like to, I like to really focus on an individual, right? Particularly, right, a child, and I like to really amplify their dharma, right, just through my visualization or through my prayer or through my meditation, because as a teacher, you are the giver. As a parent, you are the giver. As an older person, you are the giver. The older person is always the giver, right? Again, if you're in a romantic relationship, that can be different, but if you're working with children, you are always the giver. You are always the giver. You are always the mother frequency, regardless of the sort of circumstance, right? Universally, the older person is always the giver, right? The elder, we've seen it as the elder is the giver, the great endless giver of wealth and knowledge and experience. So in my sort of, meditation of him, I saw him, and I saw him in South America, right? He is also bilingual, so he speaks Portuguese, Spanish, English, some French, but I also saw him in South America as a much older man, a very handsome older man. And and the word that came up to me is conservation. It's just, and I don't use that word a lot, and honestly, I mean, I don't use that word a lot, and I don't really look into the definition of that word, but it just came up to me, into my vision. And this young boy, like, even though he couldn't really articulate himself, like, he was struggling, as all young people, they don't know how to articulate, but his enthusiasm was like this towards me. He was like, yeah, like, she's listening, like, let me tell her everything, like, let me get it all out. And he was just like in a haste to get it all out. It's almost like time was escaping him, and he just needed to get everything out, like all of it out. So he was discussing about himself and his experiences. He was discussing about his trip to Brazil, and his kind of getting to see the animals and the crickets and the insects, and he saw bats. He was talking about the dolphins, and he was talking about sharks, and we were talking about deep sea diving. And it's just, conversation was like so endearing. Like, it was not about video games or like what's on the news or like in a TV show. It was really about being out in the world and just observing and participating in everyday life, like natural life, like when you're seeing animals, or when you're going scuba diving, or just when you have a presentation at school, right? And what you like about school and what you don't like about school, right? And the way he was looking at me, I never have that with adults. Like, a lot of adults, they can't look at you for more than like 5 seconds before they like look away, or they look down, or they look at their phone, or there's just this disconnect with a lot of adults. They just can't really like focus on you, because as adults, we're like all over the place, right? We're trying to find a man, and then we have our kids, and then we're trying to find our next husband, and then we have all these expenses because we have all these cars and all this stuff that we're trying to figure out how we're going to sustain all of this stuff, right? And then, we're thinking about our weight, and then thinking about our look, and we're thinking about if we're beautiful, right? All these things, how we're going to pay off the debt, and right? So we can't really even ground ourselves or even focus on anything that's very present and very attentive and devotional, right? Such as being enthusiastic on subjects that bring you great fulfillment. And so when he was talking with me, he kept coming closer, and just like in and in and in and in. His eyes were just staring into mine. He just wanted to talk. And I let him, because I'm the giver, right? And what right, and he wanted to take from me, what he wanted was for me to listen. That's all he wanted. And I'm the giver. So I'm like, okay, if that's what you want me to give to you, that's what I will do. So I just did that, and I listened. And that experience was extraordinary to me, in the way that it really showed me more about the Gen Z, right? Because I myself am like that. I'm just like that first grader boy. I'm just like that. Like, when I'm in a big crowd, I'm kind of to myself. Like, I just hang out and do my own thing, right? I'm very like reliant on myself, and I can count on myself, and but when I'm alone with somebody who's available and receptive, like, I just have so much like I want to share, and like what I've seen and observe, and what I just about humanity in this planet. And I believe many Gen Zs, not just myself, many have that same kind of, when you really open them up, a lot of them have much to share. They have much to express. They may not know how to articulate it, but a lot of them have a lot of insight. They are observing. We're all observing. And we see things, and we share what we see. So this very much activated me, right? I was very energized by this exchange, right? This discussion. And while I was contemplating on that today, and my mother was discussing about today with me about how a lot of farmers, are mostly older, right, men or women, and that a lot of there's not that many young farmers that are Americans, and a lot of our you can say a lot of some of our many produce, right, is being imported from other internationally, right? And when I go back to my college, my community college, right, in the South, right, Tennessee, I really think about how I don't really remember a strong focus on agriculture. I didn't really see that. It seemed like there's so many of the millennials and so many of these young people, there's this American dream that is so addictive to a lot of, like, it's like I just want to, I just want to be like rich and famous, cheap. I want cheap money. I want to be rich, right? So even when you look on YouTube, there's just most of you see the millennials, even younger. It's just about attention. It's just about. YouTube, you can see how to get a bigger butt, and there's probably thousands. But if you like type in something like of farming, you'll find a lot of videos, but it's not going to have many views because honestly, we're just not. It doesn't seem like we're very curious about it. Like we don't really like. It's just we think that it just falls from the sky or something, right? Because we're so used to, especially the young people. It's just everything just comes to our door. Like you just go on Amazon and it just comes to your door the next day. We're so used to not being self-reliant in the way that you just go click. You don't even need to do anything. Just go click and somebody else will give it to you. So a lot of these young generations, like, oh, something, just give it to me. Even when you look on all social medias, if I showed you like a picture of me with a piece of, like, I grew like strawberries, that would probably get less likes than like, hey, look at my nice butt. I just did some crunches or some squats, right? And the reason I connect this with the Gen Z, right, is that we Gen Zs, we are going to be on this planet when possibly there's 10 billion people. And we know that who's going to, like, we have to provide and sustain 10 billion people on this planet. Now, again, that's just a projection, right? Now, again, that's flexible, right, depending on what we're doing, right? But when I go out and I go into like the denser city, you can say, denser areas where it's really, really populated, I see like just so many families that are just so in their own world. They're like, I just want my baby and like my like 5 kids and my husband, and it's just people like just want to be in their own world. They're not looking at the bigger picture, right? So like I don't care about there's gonna be 10 billion people on this planet. I don't care that even if I'm ready to have a kid. I don't care about connecting with my spirituality or creativity or getting connected in pursuing a path of service to this planet. A lot of people are like, I don't care about that. Like, I'm entitled as an American to have a nice car, to have a bunch of children, as many as I want, and to have all the wealth that I could ever have, right? To be privileged, right? But us, as the Gen Zs, I feel like we see the bigger picture. We understand that the game is going to change, right? It's going to change, and it may not change this moment, but that American dream is going to be deconstructed because, again, the people with the Instagram butt model stuff, that's not the future. That has nothing to offer. What does that have to offer? That has nothing to offer to the vitality and fruitfulness of this land. It's just a magic show, right? So when I was young, about 21, I wanted to be in the Peace Corps. So I did all the things I could do, right? I filled out the form, everything, and I wanted to go to Peru because I wanted to work with the children, right? As a sort of not a teacher, but I wanted to work with children as like a guide. And I noticed in the Peace Corps, there's a major sort of agriculture demand, like people who have degrees in agriculture. It seems to be high demand in South America at the time when I was looking at the different positions, right? And we don't look at agriculture as like, oh, when you look at like mainstream, or this sort of what seems hot in the social media world, and like Instagram or Twitter or these other things, like nobody cares about that, right? But that's reality. That's what we need, right? So I wanted to share this reflection, because I do believe, as the Gen Zs in this new decade, our culture and our artistry, right? Every decade has a medicine offering, right? It has a perspective. It has a lifestyle. And I believe the lifestyle of this particular decade is going to change, as all decades do, right? They're always constantly evolving in some way. And this culture and this artistry, particularly because in 2036 we're going to be in the Aquarian age, which is basically we're going to have to grow up, right? Spiritually, and we're going to have to get a lot stronger in our nervous system, and we're going to have to really reprogram our mind to be able to move forward, right? Because we're not just here to procreate. We're not just here to mate. We're not just here to just survive in our sort of primal sex, money, power, in the status quo. We're actually meant to, at this time, according to the Aquarian age, we are meant to experience a renaissance. We're meant to have a sense of spiritual victory that's not religious and not judgment. Not everyone's going to hell, or you're all sinners and die a sinner kind of stuff. That's very aggressive, and that attacks people and just kind of is very destructive, right? There's a lot of like negative agendas associated with that. So with this particular Gen Z decade, I feel that there's going to be a heavy focus on integrity, on disclosure. That word comes up. And there's also going to be a focus on creativity being purposeful. Right now, a lot of, you could say, creativity, or a lot of just mainstream, or what you see, like the sort of propaganda of it all, like that's just always flashing in your face. A lot of it seems very much shallow, superficial. Again, I'm from the United States of America, so if you're from like Iceland, or if you're from like Taiwan, it's gonna be different, right? This is what I observe in my day-to-day kind of consumerism and capitalist sort of life. That's pretty consistent, especially living in a major city. That's really all you see is this magic show that's everywhere, and rarely do you actually see connection to nature or preservation of nature. We talk about the preservation of nature, but the pollution, it seems to be much more overpowering than the actual power of preservation, right? So we're seeing this Gen Z right now, and a lot of these young people, they do desire integrity, disclosure, and they do desire creativity to be purposeful, meaning for it to actually bring a sense of fulfillment at a soul level, right? We call it dharma. The fulfillment at a soul level is dharma, right? And a lot of the millennials, and we think of like in the culture, right? In then their sort of perspective, a lot of it has, there's been a lot of confusion with the millennials. There's been a lot of distraction. There's been a lot of even escapism, or there's a lot of even victim, and there's been a lot of movement and their own sort of flow and doing their thing, but there has been a lot of distortions in sexuality. When I think of all the butt models and all of the Instagram and all of these sort of terminologies that seem very, very like ghosting, or I know that's the only one I know, but there's a whole list of all of these millennial jargon that's very much immature in the way that you're not really connecting with yourself, right? Because if you're connected with yourself, ghosting just seems really below you. It seems like, right? any sort of friction or any sort of relationship you have is an opportunity to experience your victory or an opportunity to discover something about yourself, right? So it seems very, very sort of disrespectful, right? So there's a lot of this, sexual, like, there's been a lot of, like, we think of the American dream and we think of, like, the millennials kind of, there's been a lot of almost like sex trade going on, like when we see of, like, people, the Instagram models who are getting, money for basically selling sex, right? And this is it's not just the millennials. I mean, it kind of bleeds into other generations. But I do believe the Gen Z, since the planet is yearning for fulfillment at a soul level, to actually have integrity, disclosure, and actually have creativity that's purposeful, that isn't just about a bunch of flashing, thugs or like just ravaged people, like just like licking their lips, or just sex and just their gold chains, or whatever it is that we see as the American dream. Because a lot of it, at the end of the day, when you actually discuss with these people, it's probably like empty, right? There's been the one thing about the millennials is that there's been emotional bankruptcy going on, and we're trying to compensate with the butt photos or with whatever it is that we're selling, right? Millennials is just selling. But now the Gen Zs are looking at, okay, I want to sell not just like something that isn't really high quality or something that is emotionally broke, right? A lot of people like emotionally broke. I want to sell something that actually is nourishing, that's well thought of, that's healing and contemplative, and it really helps people to move their energy and to experience their joy and their maturity and their excellence. Because when you're emotionally broke, because you're stuck in a trauma or your childhood or a victim or an anger, and you don't have to move the energy, and you're trying to use substances to move the energy because you really want to get an altered state of reality that can really open up your consciousness, so you can maybe experience something more than your depression or your sadness, right? But I do believe the Gen Zs, they are very observant. I've seen multiple kids are very observant, right? They're they pay attention very closely. They're very intuitively led, and they're very insightful. If you just sit with them, they will, if you listen and just open your mind, you will discover, not in what they say, because they can't really articulate until, they're much older. Like, even I can't really fully articulate the expansiveness of my inner reality, right? But there's just being in their presence, they have so much they want to share. They have so much they want to express about the state of this planet, and that they deeply desire for the state of this planet to, they want a higher vibration, right? They want spiritual victory, right? In the form of integrity, disclosure, and creative purposefulness. And I just wanted to share this Gen Z reflection as an activation. Like I said, with agriculture and with farming, a lot of us young people, we just turned away from that because we're like, it's not rich and famous. It's not gonna, like, I want women licking my toes and this sort of Roman, like, that's a Roman program. Like, I just want to be rich and famous, and a lot of it is a way of coping with the childhood trauma, and like, that's not a Band-Aid. That's not to solve all the problems, because what we really desire at the fulfillment of soul level is we desire the community to be restored, because that rich and famous stuff, we know there's a lot of self-hate in that. There's a lot of self-hate. There's a lot of self-hate. There's a lot of, like, personality disorders. There's a lot of persona, like, ego issues, like severe identity crises going on. that people can't even sit still. They're restless. They can't sleep at night, or they have these attachments that just it just is so heavy on their psyche, right? It's like a cost, right? They're not liberated. They're very bound, but they're bound to something that actually isn't connected to the earth or anything. It's just connected to a Roman program that isn't really set up for a stable economy or a stable ecosystem, really. So a lot of the economy is imbalanced, the ecosystem's imbalanced, and then we just have these rich billionaires just kind of sailing through the ocean while there's a bunch of, just plastic underneath. Like, that just feels odd to me. That doesn't feel like that is the goal. But we all are like in this sort of like addicted, and we're all like, looking at all the social media and the programs of all these people that say, I'm going to be a billionaire. It's just, we're just literally like programmed to like get into that, right? Just to get into that. And then what we do is we lose, because farming, and what the thing about farming and agriculture, why I really like it, because I was a farmer in most, past lives, and that's why I never will have nails, because my hands will always be touching dirt. Every day I always be touching dirt, and that's why I never have my nails painted, or because they'll always be touching dirt. And the thing about farming and agriculture, even a winery, because I've been to a winery in Spain, the thing about it is that it teaches you craftsmanship, it teaches you elegance, it teaches you patience, it also teaches you respect for the land, and it also gives you this fondness, this appreciation for the land. Like, because you learn about the history of the land through your family, because most farming is given from the family. It's a family practice, right? It's given to you from the family. Like, your family, bought the land and they use it, right? So it just teaches you this great like this appreciation, this gratitude for the land, and it makes you very, very soulful as a human being. Right? A lot of these, when we talk about in real sort of wineries or farms or places of agriculture, there's just this feeling of being grounded and being natural and being very intuitive and being very calm and almost soothed and healed, right? Now, we know a lot of farms and agriculture, there's slavery attached to that in many regions of the world, not just the United States, right? But we also know in the community, right, when it is in a community of volunteer, in a community of support, in a community of service to just the overall, the bigger community, it really brings this it brings a particular quality to human being that a lot of these rich, whatever privilege, this, that, and the other doesn't really have. And that's craftsmanship, right? Because when I look at these, again, like, I'm from the South, so there was a huge program about like mechanics or engineers. Like, that was like the big thing, right? Cars, building cars, and the next level of cars, and the Tesla cars. And in the South, there's no purpose to that. Because that's not the necessity. That's not the sustainability force of this planet in the decades to come. Right? So there's like in a lot of it, the mechanic or the engineer stuff, when it comes to these kinds of things, it just is more about, like, again, from the South, like there's this culture of like, you spend all your money on just having this nice car. But then when you go home to your wife, you have no money for your kids. Or you're living like in an apartment that's really cheap when you could have something much nicer if you had that extra $200 or $500 a month, right? That was spent on this mega car thing, right? So again, like, when we look at that, sort of capitalism, consumerism, we know as Gen Zs, and we observe that it's not sustainable. Right? But what is sustainable is individuals who are connected to the land, right? So in the decades to come, there is going to be more of a focus on like herbalism and learning that. Like, we're going to see a lot of people, because that's a necessity, right? We need more like herbal practitioners. We need more body healing practitioners, either somatics or chiropractor or whatever. More of like a teaching of how people can actually do it themselves, not do it for them, right? More when it comes to farming, when it comes to conservation, or when it comes to preservation of the land or of the species of animal, or when it comes to pollution. Like, I feel like this is all going to be everything. The American dream is going to shift. May not be the today or this year or in the next 5 years, but there's gonna be a transition where, especially us as Americans, we're going to start to realize that, yeah, we have to be connected to the earth, because that's what makes us more creative. When we're disconnected, we're not very creative. We're just pulling from emotional bankruptcy, right? And then when you're emotionally bankrupt, then you most likely become bankrupt in other areas of your life, right? And so really this new decade in this Gen Z is really about, we want to have fulfillment at a soul level first, right? Get in contact with Dharma, learn what it is to be in Dharma, to be in contribution, of service. Because again, this is like a conversation. People like who are deep in the material world, or deep in the whatever American dream, are like, what is she talking about? Like, total, their ego is just like real stubborn and like, no, I'm entitled, right? Or they're angry, or they're very bitter, or they just have all this kind of trauma associated with it. But we know at the end of the day, we can have the biggest butt, we could have money from sex trade, we could have a product that is the greatest, but if we ourselves are emotionally bankrupt, or we ourselves are not grounded in our sense of integrity and our sense of creative purpose, it's just all a product that's just miscellaneous, or it lacks craftsmanship, and everything begins to lack craftsmanship in our life. Even our relationships, that's why we jump in, we jump out, because we lack craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is about, like, again, when you're a farmer, you're like, like, oh my god, when is the rain coming? Like, oh my god, this is so frustrating, I need it to come, right? Or you're like, oh my gosh, like, come on, let's do this, the soil, we gotta figure this out, right? There's this sense of dedication, there's a sense of participation, there's a sense of willfulness, and there's also this sense of being meditative, right? Kind of just being in it, right? Knowing you're not going to get something from it initially right away, but eventually something will grow. So it really teaches you the natural laws of the universe, really. Just growing a tomato is teaching you the natural laws of the universe. And that gives you this sense of integrity, that sense of, okay, this is what it's about, and that gives you craftsmanship. Like, for example, in the Indian tribes, like, you cut down a tree and you would make it into a canoe, right? And the whole sort of craftsmanship, it was ceremonial. It was a ceremonial practice. When you cut down the tree, it was very ritualized, and then you would carve it into a canoe, and that was ritualized. And it gave you this sense of integrity and this sense of self-mastery, to know that your connection with the earth is very balanced, it's very solemn, it brings this sort of equilibrium, this equanimity, right? But all of us, we're looking at trees like, oh, I don't really care. When when many Gen Zs, when we go by trees, we're like, we smell the pollutant, the smog or whatever it is, and we go by trees, a big area of like a lot of trees, and we smell the trees, we're like, thank you, trees, because you're cleaning up all that pollutant smog stuff that's choking me, right? Because we know that trees naturally, when you're connected to your life force as a human being, trees naturally, they take in the toxins in the air, and they basically release what we know, pure, clean oxygen. They are so powerful at taking in the worst pollutant and recycling that crap into clean air. That's their magic, right? And when you're connected, again, like a farmer or agriculture, you can smell the rain when it's like 2 weeks before it rains, right? Even, we call on the rain. We talk about the green thumb as it's like a magic. You feel magical, like an alchemist. And that's what this new age is, this new decade is about. We want to feel like we're an alchemist. And alchemy is not about how much money I have compared to how much money you have, how big my butt is, I got the money, whatever that sort of ego attack you're doing with yourself. It's like conflict with yourself, like battling yourself. That never goes anywhere except emotional bankruptcy. Where you just totally lose sight of yourself, your inner child, your authenticity, and you just kind of get caught in the sort of stagnancy of anger and rage and call, even some people are like, they look soulless. They look so hard, they almost look soulless. Very sad. Very, very sad. That's the greatest sort of sorrow. But with, the Gen Z and again, I'm kind of, sort of an advocate, or say, for farmers. Like, farmers, like, like Interstellar movie, like farmers, like, we need more farmers, right? Even though farmers have been seen in many programmings of the mind as like slavery or like less status. For example, in Asian culture, farming is considered, you're a poor person, right? When your skin is darker as an Asian, it represents that you're poorer because you've been in the sun. So a lot of Asians try to cover up their skin with, big hats because they don't want their skin to get darker, because in their culture, dark skin means that you're poor, meaning you're not privileged. And everybody wants to be privileged. Because for some reason, when you're privileged, you're considered noble. Even if you have none whatsoever of craftsmanship, you're considered noble. Right? It's kind of like, but we're understanding as the game is changing on this planet, and if we get to 10 billion people, which I will be alive and sort of towards my old years, I'll probably be dying, right? But I mean, that's a projection that, that's, we can barely even handle ourselves we can barely balance out our relationships, and even with our kids, let alone all of a sudden we have, to figure out all these people, because I'm telling you, people are just isolated in their own families. Community, especially in American, it's lacking something. There's something missing, and I think it's integrity, a creative purposefulness, and actual sharing. That's actually like sharing that is deep and emotional and about transformation, about how we can heal and recover and reform from these issues, these troubles, or whatever it is. Because in this sort of like my family and your family, and like we just talk, but it's very like kind of shallow and it doesn't really go deep into anything, that is not going to really bring about a successful 10 billion people on this planet. Particularly because, as an American, I understand that American television is one of the most, we could say, the most influential sort of exports of media. Even though Bollywood has a more of a larger population, like, they have billions, so Bollywood is we think of it has a more population, but American export of media is one of the largest of like the films and stuff like that, and people watch, right? And they're looking for spiritual leadership, and they look to the young people as like, you're the hope, and we as Americans are the young people, right? We are so young as a nation, and I myself is not young, as in as an indigenous person. History goes a little bit further back, right? But then it cuts off and goes into another direction. But we are seen as the young people, like, and that's why people the elder nations or the elder regions look to us as like, okay, you're the young person, what are you going to do, right? And that's why there's this like, I want to go with the young people, right? That's why, we talk about a lot of people coming here because they want to be with the young people. They want to be with the young minds. They see us as the young mind, right? That we're not so heavily programmed by these sort of, Romanesque and medieval Romanesque and Roman sort of domination and sort of major authoritative influence in sort of the European kind of regions, right? So and I take that kind of into consideration, right? In my reflections on just the nature of what's going on this planet. So what I'm saying is that with the Gen Zs in the next decade, we talk about the green thumb. There is going to be this necessity and this demand, this evolutionary necessity for this green thumb. Now, this green thumb is not necessarily farming or agriculture. It could also even be engineer. But we're focused on integrity and creative purposefulness. And we really don't care anymore about the blockage, right? And people have a blockage when it comes to sharing themselves, and that's their ego, which is their judgment. They judge themselves, they judge the person, they feel judged, so they hold it in, and they have a stick up the ass, and they look emotionally bankrupt, and kind of like sort of like disconnected, right? And when it comes to the persona or their personality disorders or their childhood wounding or their sort of materialism or their entitlement or their I deserve this because I suffered or whatever it is. But we understand as the Gen Z that we don't care about any of that. It's almost like come as you are. Like, I don't care about whatever ego, persona, childhood, this, whatever that, because nothing is going to, we can say, transform and transmute if we are not actually being in the energy and actually looking at ourselves and being honest with ourselves in a way that can be challenging but also so freeing to actually go deeper and almost like a self-psychology where you're not codependent on other people, where you're not, where you have your own intuition, you have your own sense of north, your north, you're getting to know your true north, right? A self-psychology, a self-hypnosis, a self-awareness, a self-knowledge, a self-love, a self-respect, a self-worth, a self-discovery, a self-mastery. And this is what the Gen Zs are wanting in this decade to come, because that's what's going to really set us up as a culture, as the Gen Zs, like all around the world, as a culture and artistry that is very empowered to move beyond the past, to not keep the past keep going and where we've been and just the remembrance and the being overly sentimental and nostalgic in the point where we start to feel very discouraged and even pessimistic, right? To almost bring that past into the heart, feel it so deeply, have a knowledge with it, turn it into knowledge, and then release it. And that's what I've done with all traumas. I come from a lineage of genocide as well as enslavement, right? And that could grip to me. I could be deeply attached, deeply interlocked to the point where I'm so sentimental, I'm so nostalgic that I'm just angry. And that holds me back from moving on because I'm so invested in the problem of what that was. Or I could bring it to the heart, I could feel it so deeply, like cry, like tears, like a flood moves through me, and then when that self-knowledge arrives, maybe days, maybe months, maybe years, that self-knowledge, because when you seek, you will find. And then it just releases. And I no longer carry the trauma that keeps repeating cycles and patterns of sabotage and defeat and hate and confusion and judgment. Because all of us, in our DNA, in our tissue, in our aura, even in our features, in our epigenetics. We're all carrying these memories that are very nostalgic, very sentimental, that create this natural human feeling that we all have. Either you're Japanese or Canadian. I don't feel good enough. I have a lot of shame and I have a lot of emotional pain, and I don't know why I have these things. I don't know where they come from, but I battle with them all the time. And when you really come into that self-psychology, that self-hypnosis, that self-awareness, that self-respect, that self-love, that self-care, and that becomes your greatest dharma, your greatest offering to this planet beyond, oh, I got the biggest car and the hottest beach, right? Whatever that is that you see in some ways that just seems very like, I don't know, distractive, or it doesn't really feel real or platonic or kindred or soulful or endearing, or it doesn't really move anything. It doesn't really bring the sense of greater self, like a spiritual self, like a real spiritual self, like a real you and a real me and a real togetherness. So in the turning of the decade, there is going to be more of this ceremonial, ritual, resurrection, as we as human beings in the Gen Z are going to be restoring more of an expressiveness that is desiring fearlessness. I think that's what the Gen Zs really desire, is this fearlessness. And that's what self-expression is. It's a you in the spiritual you expressing yourself. So I feel like there's this fearlessness that wants to come forward, right? And to be who you are and to share that and to be received for that and to feel quite liberated and just to feel quite deeply fulfilled at a soul level for actually having that experience of expressing yourself without chains, without traumas, but just with total spirit. That's what this new decade is about. And that's going to be very transformative, especially because we are going to see Gen Zs that are becoming more spiritual leaders instead of this superficial, like Instagram butt stuff or getting attention through these ways, but they're like products, and that just seem in many ways just kind of just, it doesn't really touch you, like the spirit in you. Like when you feel like you get like connect with the herbs or the flower, the wildflowers, or you go to a retreat, or I don't know what it is, and you just feel this, it's just, you feel this almost like you feel the earth underneath your feet. You feel the earth around you, and you feel truly content with it. Like really, really like magical, and like you can manifest anything in that sort of state of like, okay, like I'm lining with the earth. I don't care about all this magic show. I'm lining with the earth and feeling a lot more free because of it. Because all of these programs and beliefs, these Roman ideology of like get rich quick, or this, you know, consumerism, capitalism that's so just like, you know, just buy until you're in debt with everything. It really doesn't make you free. It makes you feel confused, and it's burdensome. It really doesn't bring closer to the spiritual you, but away from the spiritual you and into the ego you, the personality split, the persona, the mask, the emotional bankruptcy, the entitlement, the trauma that is a problem, and the conflict that doesn't know how to resolve, and I don't know how to speak up, I'm fear, and I don't know how to move the fear. And we need the you and the spirit, and the spiritual you. And that's what these Gen Zs are going to offer through their artistry, that is really like, I would like to move beyond the disconnect with each other. Like, why are we all disconnecting with each other and ghosting and just not really owning up to who we are and being who we are and making excuses for why we aren't who we are, or basically deconstructing who we naturally are so that we can take on this common life that really isn't what's gonna bring more of who we are to the forefront, but less. So I'm just gonna leave you guys with this transmission I call the Gen Z reflection, and there you go. There you go. I give it to you. May you receive it. May you receive it.